Welcome to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al, the fortnightly podcast from the Gippsland Agriculture Group. I'm Alister McCallum, and whether you're listening in the ute, on the tractor or in the yards, this is a podcast for practical conversations about farming in Gippsland. From autumn sowing and winter feed gaps, through to spring lambing, summer harvest and everything in between. We sit down with producers, advisors, researchers and industry people to dig a little deeper into the ideas, challenges and opportunities that matter on farm. We talk about livestock, pasture, markets and technology, but also the business of farming, making sound decisions, building resilient enterprises, being better prepared for the tough seasons and pressures that agriculture can often throw at us. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into today's conversation. Welcome to Digging Deeper. We've got Pete Norwood from Full Circle Nutrition today with us. How are you going?
Yeah, good, thanks, Al. Thanks so much for having me along.
Really appreciate it. You've had a big day here at Gippsland Ag already. You want to just quickly touch on what you've been doing here, and then we'll get into your story.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's been a great day, really. So they've had the Gippsland Soil School that you guys have been running here, and it was terrific to catch up with some participants today, give them a bit of a rundown on things from maybe not an alternative perspective, but perhaps adding in some additional information on top of what they've already learnt through their soil school. So I guess it's been a wonderful opportunity to offer up some of my experience, and hopefully that offers them some further insights into their own farming businesses.
Well, there was a good feeling in the room this morning. People obviously excited to be here. Now, it's a blend of theory and practical, isn't it? Because you actually get out after lunch.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, which was really good. I think they'd had enough of all the science this morning, so to get outside and go and talk to someone practical. So we went out this afternoon. Rohan Bigley was really just super kind to be able to offer his place to come along and have a chat, because he's familiar with, I've worked with Rohan for a long time, but he's very practical and he's very business minded, and he's doing a lot of what he does, as many farmers do, on his own. So he's very succinct and effective and efficient in the way he goes about things, and I think people got so much out of that too. They could see there was what we were talking about is practical, and you can do it. And in fact, even a one-man operation can do it as well. So
we'll get into your story going back to the early days, I guess. How come you ended up in ag? Are you a generational farmer, or where did this all start?
Good question. Going way back, my father and mother moved out to and bought our family farm when we were quite young. I think it was 8 at the time. It was the showing my age now. It was the 1982 drought. It was just the year before, actually, before the drought. Yeah. They bought a farm at Mendooran in New South Wales, so they bought 1,300 acres up there.
Is it mum or dad's side?
Yeah, it was the two of them in their own right. Mum's dad had farmed when she was very young, but then he'd moved into Dubbo, it was at the time, and worked in a store in Dubbo, basically, so as a storeman. So he hadn't farmed for a long time, but Mum and Dad thought it'd be a good idea to bring the family out into a great lifestyle, if you like. Well, I think it took Dad by surprise. Yeah. There was a lot of work in it, and he was a surveyor as well, so So he was working off farm as well as trying to run 1,300 acres. So it was. Yeah, it was a lifestyle for us kids, perhaps. Yeah, I'm not sure for Mum and Dad.
Where did you say that was? It was sheep or cattle?
At Mendooran, about an hour and a quarter north of Dubbo. If you're going to Coonabarabran, you can go through Gilgandra, or you can go through Mendooran. I always tell everybody there's a pub and 2 clubs there. There's not much. There's not much at Mendooran, but it's a lovely part of the world. Yeah. It was always mixed farming in those days. So sheep, cattle, and cropping. We were running all 3. Up there, and I loved it. It was a kid's playground, really. It was fantastic.
It sounds like tough country up that way.
It can be. It's a fascinating country, part of the country from a soils perspective. You've got you're in right in the middle between the north and the south in terms of split in rainfall. So there's fairly even rainfall. It's 500 or 600 mils rainfall, but it's split fairly evenly. So you can grow winter crops and you can grow summer crops there potentially. But it's right next to the Warrumbungle Ranges, which are a volcanic range, and wherever the lava landed, which was very sporadic and intermittent, was where you had black soils. Mm-hmm. And then as it broke down, as it started to weather, it became red soils. And then where there was no lava arrived, you had, millennial old soils that were really sandy. So there was parts of it that would grow pine trees, and there's parts of it that would grow ironbarks, as they used to say in those days. That the ironbark was obviously the good country, but it was but it could get marginal. It could get very dry at times, and coping with that, was well, we were there in the 1982 drought, and I remember cutting currajong trees. We were lucky that Mum and Dad hadn't stocked up too heavily at that stage. We had some agisponite. I remember cutting currajong trees to feed the animals. It was there was not a blade of grass anywhere in the whole district. For thousands of acres. It was a pretty tough time.
Now it seems like it's well entrenched in your memory, those early days.
Yeah.
What was farming like back then?
It was pretty rudimentary. Particularly on our farm, we had an old Ford 5000 tractor and a scarifier and a one-way plough, disc plough, and an old Conochet seeder, and we had an old A84 header, which was, it was broken down more often than it was running, but there was opportunities to grow things fairly easily back then, I guess. Only from the point of view that it was in the early days of starting to people really putting in play single super and things like that. So you could sow a crop, and everyone was still cultivating. So they were mechanically controlling weeds to a large degree.
So chemical hadn't really taken off.
There was, but Dad didn't like using a lot of chemicals, only because he wasn't familiar with them. So he was scared he was going to do something, wrong with them, if you like. He built his own boom spray. I remember him building his own boom spray, which was pretty rudimentary. But no, look, there would have been minimal use of chemicals in the day. Like, we wouldn't have even used Roundup, for instance, to knock down a paddock. We would have cultivated it back in those days. Looking back on some of those soil types, probably not so good as far as maintaining soil structure goes. But it is pretty vivid. I remember when I was 13, I sowed all our crops myself. I did all the cultivation and all the sowing, and I just remember vividly, the smell of that soil. It stuck with me. I think that's part of why I get so passionate about it nowadays. Those memories.
It's obviously stuck from an early age.
Yes, definitely.
And it's carried on. So, talk us through your journey from then until now. What are some key moments?
I remember back in the day we had a district agronomist. So every district had their own government-funded agronomist in the department. And I remember the district agronomist, Dad, ringing him up one day, and he said his name was Bob Freeburn. He was very well known because he used to write a column in the Land each week. And he said, "Bob, would you come out and take some soil tests for me?" And Bob did, and then he came back, a little while later, and he told Dad what to do. And my running joke was, anyone who could tell my dad what to do, he must have been pretty knowledgeable and had a great job. And it probably sparked my interest into looking at how I could learn some, and learn about becoming a professional in the field, if you like. So
so did you go off to a uni?
Yeah, I did. I went to Charles Sturt Uni at Wagga, or Wagga Ag College, as that used to be known, and did my ag science degree there. Yeah.
And then you're obviously a long way from the family farm now.
Yeah.
Stratford originally in this area?
Yeah. When my wife and I moved down, we ended up in Stratford. It was just, we got an opportunity to buy a block of land, as in a building block, and build a house. And then that gave us enough equity to then, much to my wife's sort of chagrin, she was from Canberra, so she didn't have a farming background initially, and I convinced her that it would be a good idea to buy an irrigation block, and all we could afford was 58 acres. So that's what we started with. We still had our house on 5 acres, and we bought this 58 acre block. And the neighbour came over a few months after we'd been there, and he said, "If you ever want to sell, just let me know." And so we then managed to buy a bigger irrigation block after that, and renovate the house and add a bit of value to it all. that way, and that's what we've done. We've slowly leveraged our way up over time.
Yeah. So you're still in the Stratford area, or moved?
We've actually moved. We've just not long moved down to Seaspray, down on the coast.
On the sand plains?
It really is just the most amazing place. So we've got sand, and it is pure sand. We've got clay, but it's at least 800 to a metre deep.
Mm-hmm.
But we've also got some morass country that goes down onto Lake Reeve, and it's a really interesting piece of dirt. So it would have been laid down over a long period of time, deposited nutrients, and it's quite a different soil again. But we've only got a small strip of that.
Is that salty? Is it down there? Or?
It is very salty. Yeah, 10% sodium in the soil, which
Right.
Ideally would be 2%. So soil structure's not. It's like literally harder than this table.
Yeah.
I took the speed disc down there. I dissed one patch of it 8 times and didn't make a dent in it. So I'm going to work on some soil amendments first to soften it up.
And nothing growing there yet?
There is now. We've already put some gypsum out down there. We'll put some more out. We are this weekend actually putting some more out. And one patch of it, we intensely treated that about 12 months ago, and we're actually growing lucerne on that now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like literally just growing tussocks and pin rushes, and now it's growing lucerne. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it's there's productivity where there wasn't any before.
Well, let's just jump back a little bit, because I'm assuming at Wagga Uni it was very traditional agronomy.
Yeah.
You're not a very traditional agronomist,
No.
by any stretch. Where's this shift come from? Is it something that you've picked up, or someone that you've met that's got you pointed in your direction?
Great question. A long time ago now, I was working for a small family business locally called Daly's. A few people will remember Daly's, feed, seed and fertilisers. And when I arrived there, they employed me as a nutritionist and agronomist. Well, I can tell you now, Al, I was barely an agronomist. In fact, I wouldn't even say I was an agronomist. I was, I'd only been out of uni for 2 years. And I certainly wasn't a nutritionist, and I didn't come from a dairy background. But I was always very passionate about learning. And so I went to every seminar there was. If there was a speaker from overseas that was coming and touring around, I'd go and listen to what they had to say. But the farmers were kind of relying on you bringing some of that information to them as well. And we had 2 farms simultaneously one year that had cows going down as Dana cows. So what that means is post-calving, the cows run out of energy, and then they go down and they can't get back up again.
Yep. So I would think milk fever or something like that.
It absolutely starts as milk fever. So you go and give them a flow pack, to try and get them back up again. But it wasn't working. And it happened on these 2 separate farms, but both in the same week. And they were losing 3 and 4 cows a day. And they were desperate, and they rang me up. They'd had the vets out to have a look, and the vets had done everything they could. And I said, look, I don't know, but I know a guy that might. So I rang a nutritionist in Queensland, a bloke by the name of Jim Wade. And Jim's just like super clever. And Jim said, I know exactly what's wrong. He said, you've got a phosphorus deficiency. And I said, look, I don't want to be rude, Jim, but we've got, brilliant Olsen P levels here in our soils. I'm not sure that's the case. He said, I don't care what you say. This is what it is, and this is what you're going to do. He's pretty forthright. He said, go and get some single super and stick it in a woman's stocking. And he said, and throw it in the water trough, and tomorrow morning you won't have any downer cows. And I thought, that sounds like a magic trick,
Yeah.
We went and did it, and absolutely to the letter, the next day, no downer cows. So then I started thinking, well, why did we have such a significant phosphate deficiency in these animals when we had good phosphates in the soil? I went and tested the plants. Sure enough, the phosphates were low in the plants, but so was the calcium in the plants as well. And I started.
What did the soil test say on calcium?
I hadn't quite got that far. I tested the plants, and I was telling this dairy farmer about it one afternoon, and he said, you might be really interested in this book. And he went in and he came back out with Neil Kinsey's Hands-on Agronomy.
Yeah.
And Neil was the last of Dr. William Albrecht, who was the head of the professor of soil science at the University of Missouri between 1920 and 1960. And Neil was his last student. And Neil had written this book, and I went home and I started this book. Well, I started on Friday night. I finished it by Monday morning. It was just so fascinating. So one of the things that he had to say in the book was that if you have a tight, sticky soil and you work it up and it gets wet and you walk across it and you're an inch taller by the time you get across the paddock, that soil is very high in magnesium. And that was the soil I'd grown up with at Mendooran on the black soils there, for instance. It really triggered me thinking. And I knew that we had to start pursuing some of this data by testing. And so I split soil and sent it to 5 different laboratories. It took all the cores side by side, and I got 5 different answers. And Neil came out to Australia, and I'm thinking, we should have been taught some of this stuff at university. But he came out to Australia. I went to his seminar, and I was talking to him one day, and I said, Neil, I'm a farmer. When I get my soil straightened out, how's it going to look? And he said, well, you should be able to drive your finger down into the soil. And I thought, well, I'd break my finger if I did it on my block at the time. So I knew that my calcium wasn't right in the soil, and he explained that calcium builds soil structure, and you've got to have a balance between calcium and the other major positively charged minerals in the soil to bring soil structure back into play. So that's really what changed my complete approach. It was a very practical assessment of something that I'd been observing over time. And so it kind of went from there, Al. Because I was farming myself, my money was on the line. I really had to come up with some answers for myself and my own productivity.
Yeah. So the methodology, I guess, is now what's commonly known as a Kinsey-Albrecht.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I guess so. I did all Neil's courses, and it was brilliant. I got the chance to, travel to New Zealand, travel to the States, go and do these courses, meet a lot of people who'd been practicing around the world, lots and lots of success stories. There was then, on top of that, though, I did a lot of work in New Zealand quite a few years ago now, and I still do work over there, but at the time I was doing nutrition work, and I was working with someone who was doing soils work, and I watched things like they had low magnesium in the soil, so the opposite to what we were seeing. And I was measuring what was coming through in the plants. They'd go and put out a ton of magnesic, amendment, and still not magnesium coming through into the plant. And Neil hadn't given me the answer to that. So I guess, got to get off my laurels here. My fabulous high school teachers changed my life forever is the way I thought about it. But now I've got to go out and do some more research for myself. So I started on the next stage of my learning, trying to get to the bottom of why we were making some of these observations. That really gets the cogs turning when you go through those processes.
Now, you're doing a lot of learning yourself, but are there other people now that you see as important in that journey as well? Yeah,
look, absolutely. To be honest, the people I've learnt the most off have been the farmers, and they might not know they're teaching you. They might be just asking you a question. But if that then triggers you to go and find the answer to something. I couldn't tell you how many times in my career I thought, and I would say openly to them, look, I don't know the answer to that, but I will go and find out. And it might take me time, but when I do, I'll come back to you and I'll try and give you an insight. And over time, you got to know people that had a lot of success. There's always people who are better in their field than others. So Dad used to say to me when I was young, don't go making all your own mistakes. Go and ask plenty of questions. And so that's what I'd do. And the farmers would teach you either directly or indirectly, which has always been very enjoyable.
The one thing I notice about farmers, they're very good observationalists.
Absolutely.
And so they'll tell you, they can't always explain why.
Yep.
But they can tell you what they've seen in real life.
I always, in my seminars, I always say that the difference between a good farmer and a great farmer is observations. And they will pursue that observation. Why do you see that? I was just telling someone today, there was a famous farmer in the States called Klaas Martens, and he really he got the irrits because he had California thistles growing on some paddocks and not others, and it just drove him mad. And he said, there's got to be a reason why. And so he rang the local university and got the university professor to come out, and he tested, that we can do this, much more commonly these days, but he got him to test the soil microbiome. and he found it was completely different where they were growing versus where they weren't. And that set him off on the next part of his journey, trying to work out what was that environment that was creating that. I love that. Like that's at the extreme, but there's been plenty of farmers that have passed on tips to you and I over the years, and you think, wow, that is just, I just can't believe you've seen that and you've noticed that. And you know, even I know it sounds simplistic, but an old farmer said to me yesterday, he said, we're going to get some rain this weekend. And I said, how do you know, Bill?
What was he looking at?
He said, the sugar ants are gone crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, yeah, you're right. That's, I hadn't had my eyes open in the last week noticing it. But I said to him, it's funny you should say that. I got in the tractor last weekend. Yeah, and there was sugar ants running around in there. So
my uncle's got a good one, and this is very localised, I think.
Yes.
But when there's echidnas or turtles walking south, this is Lyndon area.
Really?
That's away from the Mitchell River.
Yep.
There's a lot of rain coming.
Is there really?
Yeah, and it's happened quite a few times actually.
Wow.
I ring him off, so I've seen lots of echidnas going south, and sure enough, a couple of days later, his theory was, I don't know who he heard it from, but they're actually moving up to higher ground.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So crossing roads and going south, but that's very localised. So
I'll keep an eye on that at home. We get a lot of echidnas at home.
Yeah, well, I'm getting keen. Whenever I was looking out for echidnas lately, we need a bit of a...
Which direction are they going?
So, yeah, that's right. Now, it sounds like you don't use any traditional synthetic fertiliser like NPKs. Is that a misconception?
Yeah, it is. Look, I do. And I've got clients that are very conventional. I work with some big corporates and they've always been very conventional. But what's fascinating is over time, they start asking you more questions. And the more questions they ask, the easier it becomes to highlight that there's some bottlenecks in a lot of our systems. And when you highlight those bottlenecks, farmers are very practical. The next thing they're going to say is, well, how do I get around that? We were talking about nitrogen a lot today, for instance. So I was there at the peak in the Alister irrigation district where we went from probably lucky to use 200 units of nitrogen per hectare per year up to 600 units. Right. And that was because we'd been to Mount Gambier and we saw the farmers over there at the time using all this nitrogen. They were growing all this grass, and we presumed that's why it was. So, what a great idea. Let's try and replicate what they're doing. What we should have been taking notice of is how many cows were in their sick herd. And it was above average.
A lot.
Yeah, it was, well and truly. And no disrespect to them, they coined a term down the track, metabolic health issues. But I remember thinking at the time, maybe we're not going in the right direction, because we didn't see. So it's not like we went from, say, 15 tonnes of pasture per hectare to 20 tonnes of pasture per hectare. We might have gone up a couple of tonnes per hectare, which, most farmers were pretty happy with. But what I started to observe was more and more animal health issues coming through. And what I explained to everyone today is that when the plant takes up nitrogen, it should convert that nitrogen into what's known as amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So when we eat a steak or a chop, and we break it down, we get access to those amino acids. The most limiting things to animal production are amino acids and glucose, and both can come available through their forage. But the amino acids will only be available if you convert the nitrogen into them, and to do that it needs cofactors, and it's all minerals. So it's things like magnesium and sulfur and boron and copper, zinc, really crucial for that process. So when you start to do some testing with farmers, and they've always used, say, a lot of nitrogen to grow their grass, but they've got the same animal health issues as their neighbour, so that's seen as being normal then, because obviously, I haven't got any bigger problem than the next person. But when they go and start testing and the tests come back with really high nitrogen, they start to say, well, if it's not nitrogen, if that's not what's holding me back, what's the next thing? And that gives you the opportunity then to explore, righto, so what else could we do? How else could we go about this process?
All right, well, let's talk as sort of practical. If you were engaged from a producer, you get on their farm, what's the first things you like to look at, or the conversations you like to have with those guys?
Well, I'll talk to them about their experiences. Are there any things that, as you've worked out, I don't mind a chat, Al. And I'm always aware that I want to give them enough opportunity to explain to me why they're looking at doing something differently. And that, that's pretty engaging once you and insightful. And then normally what we'll suggest to them is, look, let's certainly go for a drive and have a look around the farm, but we really need some data because that's what's going to drive your whole management decision process. So I'll suggest that they do some soil testing.
Yeah, now you mentioned that you sent 5 tests away and got 5 different results.
Yeah.
Who have you settled on now?
So just to really confuse things now. So I went from sending them locally, started sending them through Neil Kinsey to the Perry Laboratory in the States. It's the last laboratory in the world that's using the exact Albrecht method as Dr. Albrecht set out. From a soluble nutrient viewpoint, I haven't seen a better test, and it gives constantly replicatable tests. You can split a soil and send the same soil, mark it differently to that lab and get the same answers back. It gives you a lot of confidence in what they're doing. But it's a soluble nutrient test, so it's telling you what's potentially available. And then you've also got the opportunity to test what's called a total test as well. And that allows you to look at all the nutrients that are there behind the lines that may be complex and tied up, not available just yet. But it would mean that if you made them available, you wouldn't be applying them, for instance, and that creates a great effectiveness and efficiency. I can get them done in the US, but it's really expensive. And so I send them to a laboratory here in Australia and get it done here in Australia.
And get the totals here as well.
Yeah, get them done here. Yeah, the lab I use is EAL, so they do a really good job on that side of things. Yeah.
So what do you ask for? It's not the standard test then.
No, it's called a total Albrecht test is what they call it. I'm pretty sure. But I get it with heavy metals as well. So I get as much data as I can possibly gather. So it will give you soluble nutrients. It will give you what's called the exchangeable cations, which are all the minerals that affect the soil structure, just the same as the states. But I found that I don't like those numbers. They tend to be a bit overinflated. But the total tests are really good. Mm-hmm. I can correlate them with what I see in the soluble tests and what I see in the plants when we test the plants. That data becomes invaluable, and it gives you a really clear-cut insight as to how you can be most effective. Because at the end of the day, most farmers are going to spend some money on their soil fertility, but if I tell you that the research shows now that 90% of our soil phosphate that's been applied in the soluble forms been locked up with calcium, iron, and aluminium over time. The next thing you're going to say as a farmer, and I'm going to say as a farmer, is how, and how do I get access to it? I don't want to just keep applying it and have that happen, for instance. Having said that, if you were deficient in phosphate, I'd be telling you to apply some phosphate to the soil. So then it comes down to the conversation, well, what's the best way to do it? What forms can I buy it in? And you can buy it in a soluble form. You can put it out in single super or DAP, and that works. But there's other forms where you can apply it where it's already complexed, so it can't tie up. It's already tied up. And then the microbes will actually work to produce organic acids and enzymes, as does the plant, and release those nutrients out of that over time. So, they're the sort of things I take into consideration when I'm sitting down making some recommendations for people. But it's got to be practical. It's got to be products they can get access to. We'll use things like, we use lime, we use gypsum, we use chook manure, we'll use rock phosphate. But if people don't want to do that, that's not a problem. We'll just adapt the recommendations. We'll use. I don't. The one thing I don't use probably is muriate of potash. I'm not real keen on using that.
Why is that? What's that?
It's a chloride form, and it's toxic to the soil microbial population. So, after a while, when I spend enough time with my clients, what we're trying to work through, which is becoming more and more evident in all the research that's been done. A lot of this is really it's hot off the press. Well, it feels like that in the last 10 years. It is anyway. I'll give you an example. So rhizophagy, which you might have heard of, there's a guy called Dr. James White. So John Kempf does a lot of podcasts in the States, and he was probably one of the first to interview Dr. James White. James White learnt from some Australian researchers, believe it or not, I think they're from the University of Queensland, that plant roots can suck up bacteria out of the soil. They strip out the outside layer of that bacteria. That releases, amino acids and nutrients, and then they spit those same bacteria out through their root hair, and the poor old bacteria tumbles around in the wash, and then he starts to grow his outside layer again, and the plant can suck him up again, and it can do it up to 3 times. Right. When you start explaining things like that to farmers, and then explaining that form of nitrogen that the plant takes up is actually the most effective and efficient form that the plant can utilise, the next question the farmer asks, well, how do I encourage that? So sometimes something as simple as, say, soil structure, for instance, becomes really important, because the microbes can't live, without adequate soil structure. Yep. So sometimes it's the basics, I guess, Al, that we've got to go back and have a look at. But the farmer becomes the questioner, because the farmer goes, right, how do we achieve this? And you're just the vehicle. You're just saying, well, there's multiple options. Which one do you want to take? And of course they're going to go and say, well, what's the cost and the return on these things? And then they'll pick the right pathway for them then after that.
Now, you mentioned on your new block that you've got sand down to like 900 mil, and then you've also got some floodplains, so to speak. Is there, in a lot of the farms you see, a amendment that's always going to help, or is it always very paddock specific?
Very paddock specific. It depends on the history, especially here in Australia. Culturally, things can be very different in different parts of the world. So in New Zealand, for instance, they've had a history of applying lime for a long time over there. So believe it or not, sometimes in their soils they've got too much calcium. Right. Calcium's brilliant because it brings those clay particles together. It allows them to what's called flocculate or aggregate together. When it does that, it leaves a space between them and the next clay. So now you've got some oxygen spaces or some air spaces in the soil where the water can infiltrate, the roots can get down. You remove the compaction and you create oxygen in the soil for the microbes. Over here, a bit more hit and miss. Getting much less so in the last few years. Even the cropping community has started to apply a lot more calcium to their soils. But if I had to say if there's one thing that creates opportunities, in a lot of cases, it is calcium, because it helps build back your soil structure. But there's other things that are critical too. I talked about sulfur today. Sulfur leaches. It's negatively charged. The clay in the soil is negatively charged. Like charges repel each other, just like magnets. And so when it gets wet, we lose sulfur out of the system. All amino acids are made from nitrogen, carbon, and sulfur. And so, we've got not enough sulfur in the system. In many cases, we've tried to make up for that by starting to add more nitrogen into the system. But you need that sulfur there. So something like sulfur is also something to be seriously considered. Just
on another little tangent then, obviously we've done a little bit of work here at the Gippsland Ag Group on the sulfur.
Yep, absolutely.
Have you been across that one?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yep.
What's that product like?
Yep.
And it been...
Yeah, it's a great product, an excellent product. It's harder to work with because it's a powder, but it can be mixed with other things and spread out. It's highly available, that sulfur. Because it's an elemental sulfur, normally when you buy elemental sulfur, it comes as a prill, and it takes a while to break down that prill. That powder is like red hot. It's really readily available. So if you were going to go out with, say, let's say 70 kilos to hectare of normal prilled elemental sulfur, you'd probably just about halve that with the powdered sulfur and get a very good response out of it.
And once that's in the system, is that is that there for longevity? Or
no,
is it,
no, you're going to have to keep doing it. I said to everybody today, there's two elements in particular that leach over time apart from nitrate nitrogen, and that's sulfur and boron. They're both negatively charged. So even if you had everything else perfect in your soil, you're always going to have to put a little bit of those things back into the system. Elemental sulfur gets converted into sulfate sulfur by the biology in the soil, and then it gets taken up into the plant. So that's the plant available form, but it's also the form that leaches. So the beauty of element sulfur is it takes a bit of time to break down or be converted into sulfate, so it gives you a bit longer. If you apply something like gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, sulfur is readily available, but it won't last long because it's already in the sulfate form. So it does take time, but I suggested to everybody today, I think even my thinking's changing a little bit. A lot of people don't use enough sulfur to start with. Then we've started by adding it back into the system, and really diligent farmers might put it out twice a year. I'm thinking we should do a little bit often, so do just small amounts but regularly through the year because of that leaching effect.
So multiple applications a year.
If it's practical for the farmer, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes these things are not practical. Science means practicality, and it doesn't happen. But yeah, to be honest, that's the way I'd be approaching things. I think you'll get a lot more effective utilisation of it.
Right, another little tangent. Foliar?
Yep.
Are you a foliar man? I know you're a foliar man, so talk to us about the foliars, because can we dissolve sulfur yet or not?
That was a good question today out in the paddock at Rohan's. No, unfortunately you can't. It's hydrophobic, and that's because it's already got some water in it to start with. So no, unfortunately you can't. The best way is to apply it ground applied. Yeah. And you don't want a lot of sulfur stuck to the leaf either. If it does get stuck to the leaf,
glues their pores shut or something, does it?
No, the worst thing is in an animal-based system. Well, number one, it can create burning. Number two, in an animal-based system, you can, if you're already low in copper, it antagonises the uptake of copper into the animals. And in an extreme case, it would cause polio. So in those animals, which is a sulfur-induced copper deficiency, it creates this neurological condition in the animals. They eventually become so B1 deficient, so thiamine deficient, that the microbes in their rumen can't function, and they die.
Gee.
It's pretty nasty. But if you apply it mixed in, a bit of lime or something like that, and spread it out, or your fertiliser blend, whatever else you're doing, that'll work really well. Yeah, brilliant. It's a good product.
All right, let's just touch on foliars very quickly then.
No worries, mate.
And then we'll finish on the Growing More Topsoils, because this is all wrapping up into that project nicely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Where are you at with, what are you playing with at the minute with the foliars?
So, for most people, I always say, first of all, let's make sure that we don't disregard the soil. The soil's got to be the starting point, because that's the engine house. The foliar is almost like a spark plug. It's allowing the plant to really fire up, produce some sugars and produce some amino acids, put it out through the roots, feed the microbes. They produce enzymes that release nutrients back to the plant. So it's this beautiful system. So it's a bit like priming the pump, if you like, but it does work really, really well. So, and from an animal productivity viewpoint and a plant productivity viewpoint, there's going to be times when you have tie-ups in coming out of the soil into the plant. So iron and aluminium can tie up copper, manganese, cobalt, zinc. They tie up phosphate. Aluminium stops magnesium from becoming available into the plant. It prevents boron uptake into the plant if it's in the wrong form if aluminium is in the form of a hydroxide around the roots. So you go and measure the plant. So as a farmer, you're saying, well, that's okay. I'll sort that out later, but I want to grow something now. You go and do a tissue analysis. So I do both. I do sap analysis and a tissue analysis. If you're going to do a sap analysis, you really need to do a differential analysis. That means you test the oldest leaf and the newest leaf on the plant, and you have a look at the movement in the nutrients. Tissue test is a bit more long term in terms of it gives you a history of what's been happening with the nutrients, and then you can go and tailor make something, for your farm.
So you'll always tissue test at least?
Yeah,
before
absolutely.
you do a foliar?
Yeah, look, I really am loath to guess, because sure as eggs you'll make a mistake. If you test, absolutely that's what's missing. So if you have when you get excess soluble nitrogen building up in the plant, it's not being converted into amino acids. That's a toxin to the animal. It actually costs them energy to break it down, and it can actually detrimentally affect their liver, for instance, if that was sustained over time. If you get sore feet in animals, things like that, mastitis, all the itises, it can be partially to do with that soluble nitrogen coming through. Even pink eye affects the liver, which affects the ability for the animal to convert carotene from the plant into vitamin A, and so they don't have an antioxidant protection of their eyes, and so they're more likely to get pink eye. But soluble nitrogen is the starting point. But you go and measure the plant, and yes, the soluble nitrogen is high, but all the cofactors like magnesium and copper and zinc and boron were low, say, in the plant. Maybe molybdenum, maybe manganese potentially, maybe iron, not as often. But you could go and foliar spray those out, and literally the next day that soluble nitrogen has been converted into amino acids in the plant, and it's come back down to a level that doesn't cause those negative issues. We normally don't have that at that extreme that I've just described, but what we have is poor, for instance, growth rates. So if you have cattle on high soluble nitrogen feed, they might get feet conditions potentially, but they may just really not put much weight on. They might be doing 0.75, 1 kilo a day. When you get that right, believe it or not, the right genetics and the right feed, the right management, it's possible to get up around 3 kilos a day.
Yeah, right.
Well, boy, that's a game changer financially to the farmer. So, with a bit of knowledge, you've really got a lot of control over some of these things. I said to everyone this morning, we can't control the weather of the markets, although that's what we normally talk about, each of us, but we have got a lot of control over this stuff.
Yeah. That's really good. Well, let's lead into the project that you're actually advising on here at the Gippsland Research Farm as well. This project is called Growing More Topsoils, and it's funded by the Future Drought Fund via Food and Fibre Gippsland. It's been running for, what has it been now, 2 years?
Might be actually 3 going into 4, I think. The original site. Yeah.
Right, well, the original site was here at the Gippsland Research Farm in Bangwarden. Tell us what has actually happened across. There's been 5 different trials, and then we're actually expanding it to the new
Absolutely.
property.
So the local farmers, as you know, and I'll give Trevor a plug. Like Trevor Caithness was instrumental in getting, and Trent Anderson, I think at the time too, was instrumental in asking the hard questions. And all of us realise how difficult it is to, be buying more land these days. Everything's getting so expensive. What if we grew the soil we already had? What if we went down instead of sideways? Oh wow, what a great concept. So what is it about the soil that's stopping us from utilising more of what we've already got? So it was about trying to understand what the bottlenecks were in the system. So they set up a control, what a district farmer might do on average in terms of treatment. And then Federation University have done a lot of good work making sure that they were utilising things like compost, for instance, and calcium in their system, along with some other nutrients. And then you had a control, and then there was also my recommendation on what I do in my part of the trials, and it's been fantastic. It's been a great sharing experience. When we first started, the farmers wanted to deep rip the soil. We had tested 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30 centimetres. And I was telling the story today, I arrived out at the trial site and they already had the deep ripper going. What they didn't have is the information that I'd got. I'd got the soil test back. And as we went to depth, the amount of iron and aluminium just skyrocketed in those soils. And they were at toxic levels, which meant that with these big deep rippers we were using, and as I heard someone say, look at that, it's boiling it up to the surface, we were bringing all that clay that had all those nasties in it to the surface. That clay's also got a better water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity, but it's then out of balance and it creates these tie-ups. But they did the same thing on every plot. Oops, sorry. But except for my plot, where
lifted it up a bit.
I asked them would they lift it up kindly, which was very kind of them to do that, really. And so, but even still, we had some imbalances there. And one thing that you can do to get on top of things like iron and aluminium is you can add something like silicon into the soil, for instance. So, so that's been part of the process. The soil structure, adapting the soil structure with, once again, all the things we've already spoken about, we did that based on the soil tests. And we did microbial testing right at the very beginning. I don't know if you even know this, but I did what's called a Haney test, which is it's a bit of a generalistic, quick test, but it's recognised as identifying biological activity in the soil. But I also did a microbiome test. I sent it off to the States, and I got a DNA analysis done on the soil back then. That was on the control site when we first tested it.
Right.
What's going to be really neat is to go back, whenever you guys decide that we're getting towards the end of the trial, and go and redo that testing again and see where we got to. In terms of physical observations, what we're starting to notice in all the plots where they've had treatments, and the farmers put lime and gypsum on as well, and the same with Fed Uni, for instance, is that we are starting to grow more topsoil. That this, it's a pretty shallow sort of topsoil sitting on top of a horrible yellow clay, as you well know, and that clay is starting to become crumbly. It's starting to form aggregates, which is pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, I think some of the measurements that stick out in my mind are the top one is up to 40% more. So we have about 100 mil of topsoil.
Yeah, wow.
And then a fairly distinct horizon down to the next one.
Yep.
And it's gone from 100 to 140
wow.
mils.
Yep.
And the other observation, which you've mentioned a few times now, is I got the fun job of digging soil pits for field days with the little excavator.
Yes.
And it was incredibly difficult to dig in the virgin country or the control, just tough and tight and hard.
I can imagine.
Whereas I could use a mud bucket for the other pits. So it is moving
fantastic
down, and we've got a lot of interest and support from our members and people that come on site. And so we've got a new property around the Bairnsdale landfill site, Skeene Creek, and so we're actually replicating this, but with some differences, aren't we, this time around? So
I guess I've tried to learn from any mistakes I might have made. For instance, on our plot, I've done a lot of follow-up testing, so for instance, on the original plot now, I can see that I've underestimated how much calcium I need to apply. I need to apply more calcium on that site currently, and so I've taken that into consideration when looking at the test results for Skeene Creek. So hopefully we get more and more refined in the way we go about it, Al.
We've changed it. It was obviously on a larger scale. So this whole site was a hectare at the Gippsland Research Farm, whereas now each treatment is up to 4 hectares big. So it's grown in size. And then we're also the new sort of addition that we're doing is we're just top dressing one section. We're shallow incorporation for the amendments on the next, and then deep incorporation for the last one. So we'll also, because expensive process to when you start using big machines. So
absolutely.
We're going to see if just the top dressing or a light cultivation will actually happen. And what's your sort of thoughts on it? Is it just a time factor, or is it not going to be as effective?
So if you can, particularly in the top 10 centimetres, work in those amendments, it's brilliant. Like it works really, really well. To get them deeper than that, I don't know that that's necessarily something that you need to do, and it is expensive, as you said. The reason why is because over time, the plant roots. So we talked about stress on a plant today. As you remove stress off the plant, the roots start to grow deeper and deeper, and as they do, they will start to distribute nutrients at depth. So silicon protects the plant's roots, for instance, against iron and aluminium toxicity. Silicon builds up in the plant's roots. What creates organic carbon in the soil is that you break down the ends of the roots that are dying via the fungi, and then you've got things like actinomycetes, the bacteria that build that back up into organic carbon in the soil. But those roots are full of what's called monosilicic acid, which is the available form of silica, which means then those new roots that go down to that depth have that available to them. And so it starts to create this protective armour, if you like, so that the plant roots can get deeper, and also you start to get more and more nutrients come available to that plant. So the plant roots will do a lot of work for you. But it does speed things up if you can work it in the top 10 centimetres. It does definitely speed the whole process up.
Yeah,
for sure.
well, hopefully we'll have some results by springtime this year. And the other thing we're looking at is water holding capacity.
Yep, right.
We had a fairly good autumn start.
Yep.
Down here in East Gippsland. There's moisture underneath it. The top couple of inches are now really
Pretty
dried
dry.
off, and
Yep.
so that's the other thing. If we can store and hold water down there,
Yep.
and then get those roots tapping into that
Absolutely.
little aquifer down there,
Yeah, absolutely.
might be able to grow some green grass and everything else is brown around us. So.
Yeah, look, Rohan Bigley was talking about that today. On his farm, he said, look, it hasn't made a difference putting all these amendments on, and he said, well, I feel that we have this much greater resilience in our system, but he said we'll be one of the last farms to go dry and one of the first farms to go green. It does make a huge difference, especially if you're running an animal enterprise. The less time you have to feed those animals, the less effort, less cost. It's just enormous.
Yeah, extending those shoulders to the growing season is very, very important. Now, I didn't actually give you a heads up on our final question, Pete, but the final question is if you could go back to a young Pete Norwood and give him some advice, what would your advice be to yourself?
That's a really good question. I think keep an open mind. Ask lots of questions. Make sure that you spend time with people who are passionate and are happy to teach you. Because life will be a joy if you do. You will have some opportunities that other people wouldn't have, even just because you're open-minded. Just because you were taught one particular way doesn't mean that's the end of the journey. And I've had multiple stages in my journey, and I'm sure there's plenty more to come as well. I'm at the stage now where our children are talking about coming farming with us, and I'm sure they'll teach me a lot in the next stage of our career. So, don't let things beat you up. There's times in farming when it does get tough. I used to say to my clients, look, let's take this opportunity in this tougher time to do one experiment on one part of the farm, even if it's just a 10-metre square patch. When things change, we'll be ready to go. We'll have learnt something out of it. So don't let things. I would have said to young Peter, don't let things get on top of you. Take the attitude that there must be a reason why this is occurring. Take this as a learning opportunity, and I think, hopefully that drives you a long way in life and keeps a smile on your face while you're doing it, Al.
Appreciate you up in this area, your insight and your passion. Inspiring. And do you want to just give your business another plug?
Yeah, sure. So my wife and I, Emma, Peter Norwood, Full Circle Nutrition. We do agronomy and nutrition work, consulting work. We're both here and overseas. Yeah, we do a lot of work overseas as well. So yeah, we're pretty fortunate.
Yep. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.
Now, that was Full Circle Nutrition. Just find you on the website.
Yeah, we haven't actually got a website, Al.
No.
I'm sure they could get in touch through the Gippsland Ag Group if they had to.
Yeah, if you're looking for Pete's contact details, for sure, send us an email here or on the Facebook page, and we'll be able to hook you up with Pete. But appreciate you coming in.
Pleasure. Thanks, Al.
And
Thanks for the opportunity.
Really enjoyed the chat, and so look forward to the next one.
You're a busy man. I don't know how you do it all. You're incredible. Thank you for your time.
No worries. All right. Bye for now. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.